Well, you mentioned the mainstream. I'm curious how a writer like Leena Krohn, who has at least some works that are fantastical,
Mm.
but is probably not considered part of the science fiction fantasy community, fits into Finnish science fiction fantasy.
Oh, yeah. Lena's a bit older generation author, but her work is definitely
Mm-hmm.
something that at present it looks like the majority of Finnish science fiction authors are, if not mimicking, but they are following the trail of
Mm-hmm.
this low fantasy, low technology setting that is this perhaps sometimes the near
Mm-hmm.
future, this day, or slightly different,
Mm-hmm.
so a magical today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she's not part of the fandom or hasn't been around with science fiction people
Mm-hmm.
really, but yeah, she's definitely the part of the literary tradition
Mm-hmm.
of Finnish science fiction and
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. But yeah, she's considered to be a mainstream author,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Johanna Sinisalo is also nowadays
Mm-hmm.
looked as a more mainstream author in Finland
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a magazine that the name translates into English as Star Rover that was founded by, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Toni Jerrman.
Yes.
Yes, okay. I've been struggling with the Finnish pronunciations all week, but he's the founder of this magazine, science fiction fantasy magazine, and it was recently he was recently honored with a For Love of the Book award at the Helsinki Book Fair, which comes with a huge cash prize of 5,000 euros, and he's been doing this for a while. I was curious if you could give us a sense of how Tony's work with that magazine has influenced the scene.
I would be happy to do that. I see you cunningly avoided the mentioning the Finnish name of Tahtivaeltaja, which means star rover,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. Um, Tony's been, let's be explicit and clear about it, instrumental in bringing international science fiction and fantasy through the pages of his magazine to the readers of Finnish science
Mm-hmm.
fiction magazines like Tahtivaeltaja especially.
Mm-hmm.
The way he has embraced new, even though he might not be that enthused about it himself,
Mm-hmm.
and from time to time, he's a science fiction person to to his core. So fantasy is not something that he would be uh, choosing as his primary reading, but when I and a couple other approached him and saying, well, how about some fantasy to your page? And said, of course, bring it on.
Mm-hmm.
And new stuff. I mean, I remember that I wrote my first new weird
Mm-hmm.
article in Tahtivaeltaja 2003,
Mm-hmm.
2002, that
Yeah.
was, or even before that.
Yeah.
Can't actually remember. Oh, sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, from the pages of
Mm-hmm.
Tahtivaeltaja, quite a few the names that nowadays are considered to be the leading lights of
Mm-hmm.
Finnish science fiction
Mm-hmm.
uh, book field, like
Mm-hmm.
Pasi Jääskeläinen, well, Pasi Jääskeläinen and a couple of other names
Mm-hmm.
came from, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, new science fiction and fantasy, horror, especially horror in Tahtivaeltaja's case, um, are brought to Finland in the pages of
Mm-hmm.
Tahtivaeltaja.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nowadays, of course, people can go to the web and
Mm-hmm.
look at all these things. But in the olden days, when we didn't have that luxury, Tahtivaeltaja was the beacon
Mm-hmm.
that led us to all the good new stuff
Mm-hmm.
here in Finland.
Yeah, and I like it a lot because it has a kind of punk, also kind of almost cult pop culture feel along with the science fiction fantasy, which I think would translate well to a U.S. audience if it was if someone did something
Yeah,
similar there.
Tony
So.
Tony doesn't only do science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
He has to have everything under the sun
Mm-hmm.
included within the pages, whether it's comics, whether it's anime or manga
Mm-hmm.
or movies, television series, toys,
Mm-hmm.
games,
Mm-hmm.
music. Especially music is something that he's very interested in.
Mm-hmm. Well, where is the energy in the scene right now, and what authors would you like to see translated into English, whether they're new or long established?
I think the energy now is quite depleted. We being hoisting these VanderMeers around Finland for a week now, and that's taxing.
I understand.
Yeah, but I think it's a wonderful time for Finnish science fiction and fantasy field and fandom. It's been for quite some time now. There are new things happening all the time. The field is changing rapidly from science fiction to fantasy to horror and slipstreamy and that. And new authors being published, and there are elements of science fiction and fantasy found in more mainstream authors' books. People are embracing the field. Obviously, there's a lot to be done, but I see only good things ahead. And as to people that ought to be translated into, let's say, other languages other than Finnish, Tiina Raevaara, who recently won the Runeberg Award for her short story collection, would be one you should, you English-speaking people, get your hands on. Vivi Hyvönen has this wonderful new weird slash noir slash science fiction fantasy book called Monkey and the New Moon. That is just blew my mind when I first read it. I mentioned Pasi Jääskeläinen before. He's author, a male author for a change. These Tiina and Vivi are both female. Who has this magical realism a la Finlandese, very well packed down. He's a really interesting guy. What else? Jukka Halme.
And isn't there a website that has some English language Finnish work on it, like finishwriters.com or something?
Yes,
or
finishwriters.com.
Finishwriters.com.
I hope it is. Actually, we should have checked this one before.
Well, I can always correct it after production.
Yes,
but,
yes, you can.
You know,
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to interview. So.
You are welcome, Jeff VanderMeer.